Legends of Tomorrow, Episode 10, Progeny. I think this is a fun episode, kind of testing the boundaries of the future of not only one of our individual characters, but also the past of one of our characters, and kind of the future of the entire planet as well. And I like what they did for this one, where they kickstarted by the end, they actually kind of screwed up, and kind of kickstarted the insane virus that kills off billions of people. And it was supposed to be 5 years away, and instead it was just a couple of days. So they wiped out, a ton of people much faster than it was initially supposed to be. I guess other than that, everything was fairly the same. They kind of just mentioned that they kind of cemented the future rather than having done anything to stop it. But I like that. I like that idea. I thought they'd probably do something a little bit kind of seeing what would happen to the future, because you would think that would have some sort of effect on Rip himself. But I guess ultimately, the way they're doing time travel, it doesn't really work that way. But I like that idea. They went through this whole process of trying to figure out, do we kill this kid? Is kidnapping him going to do something? And that doesn't work. It's like, do we kill this kid? And initially that is the plan, but of course it's not working because Rip, as he puts it, he has goodness within him. And he puts a bit too much faith in a future villain. So sadly that doesn't pan out the way he wants it to. But, they have this process. The whole episode is like, what do we do to change the future? And then Rip kind of takes it upon himself, and then that leaves us still with two other characters, one dealing with what he thought was his future lineage, and in a sense it kind of is, but it's not really his lineage or legacy. And then we have Kendra, who's dealing with her past. So we have our couple within the series, and Ray's dealing with what he thought was like his direct bloodline, falling behind him because he thought he had a child, which I thought was a really good concept. Like, he had a child that grew up without a father, and it kind of didn't make a lot of sense to me how that made sense. How it would work. Like, this child would suddenly just grow up to be like a robotics expert. Like, it was very convenient, and then it actually made a lot of sense where it turns out that it's Ray's brother that there's a statue of. It's not actually of Ray. And so we also find out that Ray has a brother, and a twin brother. He may have mentioned he had a brother maybe when he was in Arrow or something, but he has a twin brother, and that's who the bust was of. And I thought that was a cool way to do it, because in one sense it was very cool. It's like, oh, he has a child that he doesn't know about, and then in another sense it's not as dramatic. It was a funny ending. It was still cool though, going through the episode, and then it was like a funny ending, and I'm sure that kind of split some people. But I'm actually okay with the idea that he doesn't have like a random kid that he never got to be with because he went through time and all this crazy stuff happened. I prefer it this way, where it was just a huge mix-up, but it was still a part of his family. It was still his brother, who he considered an idiot, even though he went on to continue the Atom stuff, which I find interesting in itself. And that still says a lot, because obviously he has the suit with him, so the fact that they had it in the future, it was one of those things where I was questioning even from the beginning, because I thought, well, somehow they still have the suit, so something has to be happening there. And I still feel that way because his brother somehow had the suit, unless he just rebuilt it in the same image maybe. And I guess Felicity could technically help him with that, because there is, I believe there's footage for, just from Arrow, of Ray kind of going around as the Atom, so they have footage of that. And I thought it was cool. I was like, I think this is a cool story for his character to kind of deal with. And then, like I said, it ends up being sort of comedic at the end. But I still enjoyed it. Like, sort of the dramatic side of it, I still thought was pretty cool. And then Kendra's side of the story, where we get the flashbacks of her and Carter, who makes a return in this episode. And we actually see the flashback of her and Carter when they actually have Aldous, which I thought was very cool. And one thing they didn't do with that, which really surprised me, was them dying. But I guess that wasn't the point of the flashback. I thought she was just remembering a certain, part of her old life. But it was more about the love aspect than it was how that ended, because I'm like, man, they're going to do this flashback, and it's going to end with her death, and we'll see what Aldous saw when his parents were killed. But we don't actually see that, which really surprised me, because it seemed like, that's definitely where it was going. But it focused more on the love aspect, and we may or may not get that flashback later on in the episode, in the series, and they might do it where it's more about losing a member of the team, or maybe, Kendra dying herself, remembering or having that fear. Maybe she'll get captured, in the future, and we'll see the end of that flashback where that's, the memory that comes to mind, where it's her and Carter actually being killed, and then of course Carter having been killed in this series. So we might get to see the end of that flashback. They might never do it again. I feel like it's a bit of a wasted opportunity if it doesn't come back in any way, shape, or form. So I feel like they would have at least filmed that just to have it for a future episode. It just makes perfect sense. Even if they don't have an actual plan for it, it's like, that's just a shot where it's like, that seems like just the perfect thing to film for some future episode. So I'm guessing we're gonna get to see that flashback. It might not be for a while until, like I said, Kendra might get captured or something like that. But I think that would be a great scene to show, where obviously this was, this flashback, and we know how it ends, where they get killed and Aldous sees all that stuff. But they don't show us that because it was more about the love aspect and how she felt she was actually cheating on Carter by being with Ray, which is, it was like a horrible moment for Ray, I'm sure, because it was like, wow, that, he had it completely reversed. And it's like, wow, that really sucks. It makes him, feel like he's not really the most important character. So I thought that was actually a very interesting line, very painful line, but it was a really good line. And ultimately, they kind of work through the issues that they have by the end, and they kind of figure things out, so they'll continue on in the future of the series. But I enjoyed that. We also got to see Mick and Snart really deal with their issues, and despite what Mick said, where it's like, oh, I want to kill all you guys, he has the perfect opportunity where they make a deal, like, I kill you or you kill me. And it ended in the way I thought it should have ended, because Mick was always the stronger of the two, so I was like, it makes sense that that would happen, but he, despite everything he said, that's not how he truly felt, so he actually let Snart go. And then that kind of leads us into the final scene for this episode, where he mentions since he failed, the Time Masters are going to send in the Hunters. So we get 3 new, I guess, time cops, pretty much. So they're going to be coming through. They're mercenaries, so time mercenaries, really, which makes them more entertaining because they won't follow any sort of rules. So they're going to be coming through. All they're going to do is try to kill off the team, as well as kill off Mick, because he failed his mission, so they don't want him just roaming around. So we got a trio of villains coming in, which I'm very excited for. Once again, we don't see anyone's faces. It's like a weird thing, like you can't see anybody's faces from the future. But we're going to get the 3 of them coming in. They're going to come in to at least attempt to wipe out the entire team. And their first episode is going to be in the Wild West, which I'm very excited to see. We get Jonah Hex coming in, so that should be pretty awesome. Jonah Hex probably isn't one of the more well-known DC characters, but I think he's pretty cool. He's basically like, he can, I saw like the old movie, which is a horrible, horrible film, but basically he can like touch people and bring them back to life for a certain amount of time, and he has some other stuff, other weird stuff going on with him as well. But we might get like the actual story to that and stuff, but gonna be in the Wild West, the whole team hanging out and doing something. I'm very curious what the story could possibly be, because there's like, aside from them running from the hunters, I don't understand why they would even remotely need to go to the Old West, unless that's another time period where they find Savage, because like I mentioned before, they either have to keep going into the future or keep going further back into the past, and that's really the only option, is for them to go further back into the past and jump around, back there. So I don't know how they, or why they end up in the Old West, but I'm looking forward to that, seeing everyone in crazy shootouts, and just, it should be pretty interesting to see how things play out with that. But I did enjoy this episode. The stuff with Ray was probably one of my favorite parts, even though it ended in a comedic tone. I actually really enjoyed that idea of him, even without him, that being like his great-great-great-great-granddaughter, it was still his technology that did that. So even if it's not, him being a father didn't lead to her being born, that was 100% still his technology. So it was still, in a way, his legacy. It just wasn't like what everyone was focusing on, like, oh, I'm a father and stuff. It still is his technology. It's still his suit, his, well, apparently they didn't have the miniaturization stuff, or maybe they just felt they didn't need it. But it was still his tech that led to those robots being made. So despite the fact that it ended on more of a comedic note where he wasn't a father with just a child randomly left behind in 2016, it was still a big deal because his technology still led to robot enforcers that were just like blasting people. I'm assuming they didn't kill that guy in the beginning, but he wasn't moving. They shot him once and he was just like, oop, and they were like saying he's in violation of some ordinance, but he was kind of down for the count. I don't know if he died though, but they just took him down. I was like, that's still, regardless of blood or anything like that, mentally, this is his legacy. Like, that's his mind. His mind's work is in those robots, and it's still a crazy governing force. So it's still his legacy, and they could probably change that, and most likely will. Don't know when, and yeah, like I said, all the jumping around. Who knows how the season's going to end and what will change and what won't change, but that's something we'll just have to wait for. But I'm definitely looking forward to it. I think something like that, I think, is cool. That's something they haven't really touched on outside of the 2046 Star City episode, where it's like, oh, we took off, so Oliver didn't have any help and stuff like that. But this is like, way in the future, after everyone would have been dead, someone's legacy still continuing on. I think that's a really cool concept. I don't think a lot of the other characters could have that for their bloodline unless it was just, oh, I ran into my great 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 grandson or granddaughter. And for Kendra, she could of course run into her future self. That's definitely a possibility. But as far as someone's far-reaching legacy, I'd like to see more of that. I don't know what they could really bring up for the rest of the characters because he really was the only person like built excuse me, building a company and trying to change the world to begin with. So it made perfect sense for Ray's storyline to be that, and his legacy to actually impact the future way, way, way beyond his years. But I still love to see something like that for the rest of the characters. And it might be difficult to do it because we've seen the Star City 2046, and they've mentioned how if they go back to 2016, that future won't exist anyway. So there's still a lot of different components. Like technically, this future shouldn't exist if they go back, to 2016. But in some way, shape, or form, Vandal Savage does still end up in power. So even without those robots, that's just like a random thing that doesn't even matter. And then Vandal Savage takes over regardless. So there's still a lot of different components, and the way they do time travel in the show is like, well, we left, so technically we don't exist in the timeline anymore. So, the way that they skip through time, it's basically, it only exists without them until they, decide to actually go back in time and stay in 2016. Every future they see is technically slightly altered because they don't exist within it, because they're skipping over all that time. So there's lots of different stuff that they can talk about. They don't bring that up a lot, but they also don't go to the future. This is only the second time we've actually seen them go to the future outside of the space episode, which they were in space, so it kind of didn't matter. But they could definitely bring that up some more. They obviously won't in the next episode because it's going back to the Old West. But I would love to see more legacy type stuff where people deal with, for Kendra, it would have to be her future self, maybe running into her future self, or who knows, maybe trying to get answers. I think that would be, I don't know if that would affect time or anything like that, since technically it wouldn't be the same person jumping through time and meeting herself. It's an incarnation. But they could try to do that. I mean, if she got killed, 100 years in the future or whatever, they can be like, hey, where'd you die at? And they can just jump back, 40, 50 years or something like that. So they may or may not do that at some point. I feel like we have to be getting to a point where they actually run into the other versions of Kendra and Carter, which I thought they were going to do a while back. I really thought for sure they were just going to take a version of Carter from a random time and just be like, hey, join the team again. But they never did that. So that was one big surprise from the very beginning when they did that. So I feel like we're getting, really close to them running into another version of Kendra and Carter. And depending on which time period they're in, they might get answers. I guess technically, regardless of what time period they're in, if they were killed by Savage, they'd get answers. If they remembered at least, because it could be before they actually remember, and then that would be a bit confusing. So who knows? But I'm looking forward to them going to the Wild West. Hopefully we get to see a cool version of Jonah Hex. I don't know if they're going to dive into kind of his character stuff and his powers and all that. We might get a two-part thing with him in the Old West dealing with the mercenaries, and we'll have to see, because I'm not sure how many episodes this season really has. But I'm looking forward to this next one, of course. Definitely want to know what you guys thought about this episode, so please comment below. Let me know your favorite parts, least favorite parts. And of course, we go through all this stuff, and ultimately, it just makes the future worse. It makes the worst part of the future, actually come up faster. But with everything they did in this episode, and them kind of dealing with Kendra's past and Ray's, future, his legacy and stuff like that, I definitely want to know what characters you think would actually have, a really great impact on the future, depending on maybe their powers, or if you think a certain character might do something wrong, maybe, during a certain timeline. I definitely want to know which characters you think would have, like, the greatest impact. This is, like, completely, theoretical and hypothetical. Just any situation you could think of who would have the greatest impact. Because for me, aside from Ray, I actually think that, I think Rip would actually have the biggest impact. Despite him being the one who's like, we can't do this and we can't do that, I think there's going to be something where, kind of like this episode, Rip is going to make a decision that ultimately maybe it'll be, not even this season, but I feel like he's going to eventually make a decision. Like, at some point, we just need to stop jumping through time, and I need to just end this and change the future. And I feel like he's going to be done, failing at saving his wife and child, and he's going to make a really drastic decision, despite what everyone says, including Gideon. He's just going to be like, screw this. And I don't know if it'll be killing Vandal Savage, killing someone else maybe, like he was thinking of doing in this episode, or maybe not killing someone, maybe letting a hero live who died. And so, I don't know why I guess in order to keep the time, he'd let the heroes die, but he's also trying to kill Vandal Savage, so I guess that wouldn't even be a conflict for him. It's like, screw that, I'm letting heroes live. I don't know. But I think regardless of what he always does, and him being the one who jumps through time, I feel like he's going to be the one to have the greatest impact. It might not be this season, like I said, but I feel like at some point he's going to kind of disregard saving the future, and it's going to be, truly, it's going to come straight down to, I want to save my wife and my son. And it might take much longer than it did this time. We're only 10 episodes in, and they haven't really gone through too many time periods trying to stop Savage when you think about it. And he hasn't really been pushed that far. He was at a point where it's like, we could do this, but I don't think he's really been pushed far enough. But I think he will be at some point in the future. But I want to know your predictions, and of course, what you guys thought about this episode in general. So please comment below, let me know, and thanks for watching.